On November 14th, 1951, the Pembroke Memorial Centre opened to great fanfare. The Montreal Canadiens were in town to take on the senior Pembroke Lumber Kings. Today in conversation with Lionel Barber, a member of that senior Lumber King team. Welcome, Lionel. It's 65 years after this great historic building opened, the Pembroke Memorial Centre, and you must have wonderful memories from opening night here.
Thanks, Jamie. I do. It's a long time ago, and it's hard to believe 65 years. I don't know where they went.
Well, we're going to talk more about the opening night, what it was like, but I want to take a step back because you played senior Lumber King hockey here, and senior hockey was such a big deal in those days. But you were born and raised in Etobicoke. You played junior hockey. You won a Memorial Cup with the Barrie Flyers in junior hockey. And then you were trying to get your break in senior hockey. It took you to Quebec. Pick up the story from there.
Well, I went to Quebec in the fall of 1951, and that's when the Quebec Aces of the Quebec Senior Hockey League were going. Punch Imlach was coach then, and Jean Beliveau, Montreal Canadiens, wanted him to sign and play for them because he'd played 3 games earlier that year and scored 3 goals, but he said, I owe Quebec because they've been so good to me, so I'm going to stay here and play for 2 years. It was an absolute powerhouse team. So I was there, and one day after practice, I was sitting there. Punch Imlach was a tough coach even in practices. I'm sitting there, and I hear this guy standing at my feet in the dressing room, and he says, Lionel, he said, we'd love it if you came to Pembroke. So I said, well, he said, I don't know if I don't stay here. I said, I don't know where I'm going to end up. He said, well, we'd love to have you in Pembroke. There's a new rink there, the Memorial Centre, Pembroke Memorial Centre. He said, and we're going to open against the Montreal Canadiens. And he said, we'd love to have you there. So being a young guy, 19 years old and full of tea and vinegar, like most young boys are, I said, Art, is there any girls and any pretty women in Pembroke? He said, Lionel, there's so many pretty women in Pembroke, they follow them around Pembroke all day long. So the next day, 7 of us came to Pembroke. And
you all ended up trying out for the Lumber Kings, and in your case, you made the team. And just that story you've just told about Art Bogard, who of course is a bit of a legend himself, ran the McKay Street Arena, the predecessor to the PMC for many, many years. But it must have been extremely competitive if you went down to Quebec City to try to find hockey players.
Yes, it was. In fact, the senior hockey in those days was, you could have probably said it was about the 4th best league in the world, because that was long before that the European teams started to countries really started to get into it. But yes, we had a real good hockey club, and the thing that really impressed me the most was we used to fill the rink here every night. Every night there'd be 2,400 people in the rink. And it was hard to get seats. And they used to park cars all down the main street. And after the games, it was all the fans used to end up in the restaurants around town. Like they go down to Nicholson's, which is at the end of town there. That's
where Finnegan's is.
Where Finnegan's is now. And then there was McKinnon's at the far end of the East End. So it was really interesting times. It was like a golden era of hockey in Pembroke. Really, it was.
And in 1951, when you first came to Pembroke, what were your first impressions?
My first impressions was, in 1949 I went to Barrie to play for Barrie Flyers, and when I was on the bus from Toronto, I looked at they had a sign at the edge of town saying Barrie had a population of 12,000 people. I came to Pembroke 2 years later, and Pembroke had a population of approximately 12,000 people. And I thought it was interesting that for such a small community, the thing that really impressed me the most was the people. I found the people were just very, very likable, and I got a job then, and I stayed, and I'm glad I did.
Did you get inside the arena before opening night? Did you get a chance to practice here? What happened when you first arrived and started to work out with the Lumber Kings?
Well, when I first came to Pembroke, it was on my birthday, October the 10th in 1951. I turned 20 years old, and Hub Anslow and I came from Pembroke. He had a car down there in Quebec City. And when we came to the top of the hill by the arena, and I looked down the main street, it was raining. And I thought, boy, I'm going to be out of here in the morning. So Hub pulls into the old Leland Hotel.
Yes.
And the place was packed with with cars. So I said, what are you doing, Hub? He said, well, come on in here. He said, there's a lot of hockey fans. Come on in. So we go in. We got there around about about 9 o'clock or so, and I think it was 12 o'clock before we got out of there. Everybody knew Hub, so I said, Hub, where am I going to stay? He said, don't worry. He said, I'll take you up to Toots the Seals. Toots the Seals had the Windsor Hotel. And of course, Toots, like everybody else in those days, was a great hockey fan. So then I stayed there overnight, and I thought, I don't know, I might leave in the morning. But Tommy Sarsfield, who was involved with the hockey team, and he was a reporter for one of the Ottawa papers, and he ended up getting me a place to stay, boarding house. So then I started practicing here. Before we had practices before the game itself. But then when the game started, and I seen how rabid the fans were, I thought, well, this is a real hockey town. So it just went on from there. And then Art's wife, Bernice, she was a large part of it too. She was very, very welcoming to the boys. So, no, I'm glad I stayed. It's a great place.
Now, when the arena opened, was it natural? It was artificial ice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was the same as it is now.
Yes.
Same as it is now, exactly.
Modern, because in the old McKay Street arena, it was natural ice.
Natural
and
ice.
that was one of the things that they were trying to overcome. When I look outside here, we're shooting this interview in the PMC today. The original seats are still here.
Mm-hmm.
Has it changed much?
Not that much, except where we are now. This end of the rink has the Bogey's Bar and that at the end, and
Yes.
Where we're doing this particular filming, it's changed in that way. But the rest of it has not changed that much. It hasn't.
Except it would have been the wire caging that would have been in behind
yeah.
the goal.
The glass
course,
area has
probably
changed.
No glass down the sides.
Exactly, and the one thing that's changed in all ice surfaces now, in those days there was no advertising on the boards.
Yes.
Now the boards are plastered with advertising, so it's changed in that way.
First time you skated on the ice probably was a practice, but did you say, wow?
Yeah, it was very impressive. It was very impressive. Everything was so brand new, and there was so much excitement in town at that particular time. Like, it was just electric. It was almost like a Stanley Cup playoff game just to go to watch an exhibition game. But the people, and everybody knew all the players. It didn't matter who you are. Everybody knew all the players. Like, if you had to go to the hospital for some kind of an injury or something, everybody knew who you were, and they knew everybody that was involved with the team. So it was just a tremendous amount of interest.
And if I go now to opening night, so November 14th, 1951, indeed the Montreal Canadiens are here. And I'm looking at the roster, and I'm just looking at the Hall of Famers on that list. You know, Maurice Rocket Richard, Emile Bouchard, Doug Harvey, Boom Boom Geoffrion, Elmer Lack. Mm-hmm. Did you pinch yourself playing against these guys?
Yeah, it was interesting. But actually, I had played against pros before, because when we were in Barrie, excuse me, the year we won the Memorial Cup, we had an exhibition game against Chicago. And being a pro team playing in Barrie, and we had a smaller ice surface. So I remember vividly the coach, Ebby Goodfellow at the time, the game started, and the first thing you know, it's 1-0 for Barrie Juniors. It's 2-0 for Barrie Juniors. It's 3-0 for Barrie Juniors. And there was no mixing of players or anything like that. It was just one team against the other. So after the third goal, the Chicago coach, he called the timeout, and he gave his players a tongue lashing. He said, this isn't a regular junior team, he said. You guys had better get off your butts. And the first thing you know, we had fights, actual fights.
Against the junior team, wow.
Against Chicago. And they had I remember this vividly too. Doug Bentley was a superstar, and he was a centerman, and I was playing center. And I had a little right winger we brought up from the junior B team because we needed 4 lines, and his name was Mouse McDonald. And he weighed all of about 135 pounds. But Mouse could really put the puck in the net, and he could skate. So the puck's in our end, and one of our defensemen got the puck, and he fired it up towards me, breaking out. Mouse McDonald broke up right wing, and Blackjack Stewart, who was their
I love the names.
Who was their captain at the time, the defenseman, and he's a Hall of Famer, he was on the left defense. So this all converged. I got Blackjack lined up. I'm going to hit Blackjack as the puck's coming out. He eased up and leaned back. Little Mouse come up the right side, and I plastered Mouse into the boards, and he was out cold. It's the most embarrassing thing I ever experienced in my life. And
he was on your team?
He was on my team. And Blackjack Stewart, he eases over to me and he said, "Way to go, you big donkey. Look at the color of the sweater."
It's a great story.
Didn't help me.
It was tough hockey.
Tough hockey, real tough hockey. And then we had a face-off in their end, And I was facing off against Doug Bentley, and Pete Babando, who came from the north. He ended up scoring an overtime goal for Detroit to win the Stanley Cup 1 year later. But he was a big, stocky guy, and Little Mouse decided he was going to tick him with his skates, and he knocked him down. So Babando got up and he was mad. He said, "You little SOB," he said, "I'll knock your head off." So of course, Mouse being smaller than me, I said, "You big donkey, leave him alone, pick on somebody your own size." So Doug Bentley skates between us, and he pushed Babando away. He said, "Don't mind him, kids, he's trying to make the team."
When you started playing here, Pembroke was playing teams like Smith Falls, and it was more of an Eastern Ontario kind of senior hockey
That's what it
league.
was, Eastern Ontario.
But then you shifted to Northern Ontario.
Right.
What were the differences between those two
Well,
leagues?
the Eastern Ontario was a good league. It was senior A hockey. But when we went to the Northern League, it was more of a pro league. And that's what, that was actually one of the reasons why hockey here petered out in the late 50s, because actually Pembroke couldn't afford it anymore. We had guys going from our league into the NHL, and some of the guys in the NHL that were getting near the end of their careers were coming back and playing in this league. Pete Horick, who played for Detroit at the time, Howe did, said that he made more money playing for for Sault Ste. Marie in the NOHA than he ever made playing for Detroit Red Wings in the NHL.
Well, that's interesting, and we've heard those stories, and that's one of the reasons that unions came to be. You know, Ted Lindsay's story with the Detroit Red Wings in particular is quite famous about, you know, trying to bring salaries up for pro hockey players. Your career, you played from 1951 to 1958 for the Senior Lumber Kings,
Right.
and you ended up in a conundrum, you know, that you had to quit playing hockey because of your job.
Yeah, I was working for a car dealership in town, and I was used car and truck sales manager, and it just didn't work out to continue playing hockey, so I decided to pack it in.
And that must have been tough, though. You loved the sport.
It was, but you know, at the same time, Jamie, the hockey was starting to phase out too. There was a car dealer, as a matter of fact, named Wally Lenzer, who ended up taking over the team in the late 50s. But things changed, and that league kind of, I don't know whether it was too expensive, but I know here it was quite expensive to carry, because there was a lot of players that were making big bucks in those days for the money that was paid playing hockey, in senior hockey.
The other thing I think about in that, and I think you've referred to it as the golden era of hockey in Pembroke, were the 50s, you know, and maybe even into the early 60s a little bit with senior hockey. Bill Kutschke, I've heard tapes of him, was a wonderful broadcaster. I think in many ways he was part of creating that excitement around the team.
He was.
Did you know Bill well?
I knew Bill very well. And Bill to me was, and this isn't an exaggeration, he was Foster Hewitt's equal. Bill was an exceptionally good broadcaster, but the thing I liked most about Bill was he was a regular guy, but he had a fabulous sense of humor, And I remember one day we had a trip. We were going to North Bay, and Leo LaFrance, who was the president of the team at the time, was driving, and A.J. Green, who was on the executive too, was in the front seat with him. And Bill Kutschke was sitting in the back with Morris Snyder, who later became the manager of the Pembroke Memorial Centre after Bogart. And Morris had a little larger than normal head. So for some reason, Bill and Morris got into a little bit of a discussion in the back seat. And as Bill told it, he said, we're about halfway home, miles from nowhere in the middle of the bush, and I yelled up to Leo, "Put the window down, Leo." So Leo puts the window down. And he said, he took off his hat and flung it into the bush. So then Morris yelled, "Stop the car, stop the car." And Leo said, "I'm not stopping the car, I'm not stopping the car." But Kutch had a tremendous sense of humor.
He died much too young.
He did.
Only 47 years of age,
Yeah, he
but
did.
definitely a great broadcaster for sure.
He was, and a good man.
It became the